and you want your hand to translate. Remember, a hand is not a joint. We don't translate joints. If we translate joints, we have a dislocated joint. We can translate segments. We can translate points, but we don't translate things that have rotation involved with it, okay? But her analogy was, if you're trying to throw a jab, you're trying to be accurate and you're trying to translate a distal segment. And the only way you can make something translate in the body is if you cancel out rotations, meaning that you have to move two things at the same time. If you were going to throw a jab and not move your shoulder and your elbow at the same time, if you did them in sequence, one after the other, it would look like this. So we have the same motions, just not done at the same time. It would look like this. Or you can do reverse order. You can go shoulder first. But what's cool is that when you do this plus this at the same time, it looks like this. Okay? Simultaneous motion. You get a lot of that with the scapula and the shoulder. So the first thing I'm going to remind you is that this skeleton is just, he's more here for anatomy. I did not mean to assume your gender. It doesn't move. It's bolted in and screwed in, so I can't take the skeleton and move him, so I have to use analogies, okay? So I have to use, like, this is the humerus, my hand is the scapula, my thumb is the acromion, the pin is the collar. Like, I have to do stuff like that, okay? To really show you how it's moving, okay? But what I want you to take note of is, just like in class, where this scapula isn't pinned into your thorax. It's literally just floating there. It orbits the ribs. It's not held together by ligaments or synovium. It's held together by a suction cup of negative pressure, and you got muscles back there that kind of help stabilize it. The true articulation, the true connection to your upper extremity of your thorax is right here. So the first thing I want you to notice is that if I move my scapula, the collarbone kind of wants to go along for the ride. Now, if I want my scapula to elevate and have a majority of what looks like translation, that means as the scapula wants to do this, I have to cancel out rotation at the collarbone as much as I can, because the collarbone wants to do this, because it's going along for the ride. So that's why this joint is so important. The acromioclavicular joint allows some rotation, some spin in there, so that way, if you go up, the collarbone goes up, but the scapula can kind of rotate to keep the bottom part down. Because if the scapula starts to do this, then my shoulder starts to go along for the ride, because that glenohumeral joint is part of the scapula. So a lot of times, if you think about it, when you shrug your scapula, your hand stays, your arm stays parallel with gravity, perpendicular to the ground. If we didn't have this kind of cancellation mechanism, then as I would elevate, my arms would do this. So my shoulder having some adduction and the scapula itself kind of rotating opposite of the collarbone or the clavicle helps to keep my arms in a holding position. Why is that important? Because as you can about imagine, it's a lot easier to hold something straight than it is out to the side. Like if you're holding like a bucket of water, you want all that force to pass through the axis of the shoulder, not out to the side. Okay? So scapular elevation is really about kind of some cancellation that happens at the acromioclavicular joint. And also, usually when we have these functional tasks of elevation, there's some canceling out at the shoulder joint as well. You have adduction when you do this. What I mean by that is, Watch what it would look like if I elevated the scapula and I didn't move my shoulder at the same time. Adduction keeps my arm perpendicular to the ground, parallel to gravity. Okay? So the reality is that even though we talk about elevation depression as kind of these straight line things, there's rotations there. There has to be rotations there. It may not look like it because I cancel out by moving other things, just like I cancel out by moving other things and it looks like the hand's going straight, but it's because of other joints that are canceling out. It's very similar. Just because you see the scapula going up a lot doesn't mean there's not canceling out at other places to give it that illusion. Okay? So elevation and depression of the scapula. Let's take a look at this little quick video. Don't pay attention to the muscles. We're going to learn muscle stuff in 415. So again, the key thing here that I want you to take note of is that collarbone going up, going down. You can almost see the change in angle going up and going down. If that was fused, it would snap off. Like the fact that your acromioclavicular joint allows that rotation is why you can have that motion happen. I'll show it to you again. Notice the change in angle with the collarbone. Look how parallel. If you tilt, let's see, left ear, left shoulder, you can almost see how the collarbone and the spine of the scapula is very parallel. Are you guys having a tough time seeing this? Do I need to turn off the lights? Okay. Oh Lord, this is always fun. All right, you guys better behave. Look how parallel, tilt left ear, left shoulder, and look how parallel that collarbone is to the spine of the scapula. And then, as we go down, watch how cool. Do you see the deviation in that angle, right? Do you see how that changed? It's no longer parallel. Well, how did that happen? That's because your acromioclavicular joint allows that rotation to happen. Okay? So basically what I'm going to show you today is elevation, depression, protraction, retraction. And then the key thing is upward and downward rotation, where what happens if the collarbone and the scapula actually work together in motion instead of canceling out? What if they work together? What if they both go in the same direction? What would that look like? And that's what we call upward rotation of the scapula. It's sequenced motion. It's combining the motions, not canceling out the motions. All right, so what is an example of sequenced motion? Simultaneous motion, two joint motions taking place at the same time, canceling out their rotation to either summate, translate, or keep something in one position. Accuracy, very involved with this. When we talk about sequenced motion, we're talking about adding to a functional circle. This is what I mean by that is, how many different things can I move to get my hand up in the air? I can move my shoulder. Heck, I can move my hips, my hand gets higher in the air. I can move my trunk, my hand gets higher in the air. Like, you can do a lot of things. When you think about reaching up as high as you can, it's not just about your shoulder. You may get up on your toes to get your hand up even higher. Okay? Summation of motion. You think about reaching back as far back as you can. That just doesn't happen at your shoulder. Reach back. I can rotate my hips to reach back even further. I can rotate my trunk to reach back even further. So the point is that for the scapula to have what we call upward rotation, here we're going to have the clavicle, the collarbone, the moving, technically articulated with the sternum, right? Sternoclavicular, and the scapula kind of combining their motion. Instead of canceling out motion, like we do with elevation. We're going to summate motion. And the reason we're going to summate motion is so that we can take this socket of the shoulder, which is attached to the scapula, and reposition that sucker so that we can get our hand higher above our head. Guys, it is no different. It is no different than me saying, I can get my hand higher if I lean my body to the side. That's what your scapula is doing. Your scapula is leaning so that your shoulder can get higher, so that your hand can get higher. When you put your hand above your head, that is not all 100% glenohumeral joint. You don't have enough articulating surface for that. But yet, functionally, we need to be able to get our hands up above here. So one of the ways our body does that is by taking these independent scapula and repositioning them so that the shoulder now gets an extra 60 degrees or so of angulation. So what I'm trying to say is if you look at just the arm and you say 90, 180, the so what of what I'm trying to tell you is that 120 of that 180 is actually from this, and the other 60 is from this. So, how do we differentiate? It comes with practice. And it's not like you go 120, stop, and then the other 60. They kind of happen together. There's like a rhythm. They call it a glenohumeral scapular rhythm. For the purposes of this class, all I'm going to hold you to in a normal functioning shoulder and scapula, when you bring your arms up, scapula is going to lean to reposition your socket. Technically, it happens after so many degrees of bleh. For the purposes of this class, because I'm never going to ask you a question that's like, what's happening here? It's always going to be obvious, significant motion. So for the purposes of this class, if you bring your arms up, your scapula is going to reposition itself. And when you bring your arms down, the scapula is going to reposition itself. What we call repositioning the scapula when your arms go up, upward rotation of the scapula. And what do we call it when the scapula repositions itself coming down? Downward rotation of the scapula. That should be pretty simple. What happens when the scapula is trying to upwardly rotate, but we don't bring our arms up? Cancellation. And that's when we have elevation and depression. So it's a similar motion. It's just that what we call it when there's cancellation versus what we call it with summation. That's the difference. Just like there's different names of strokes and punches, they utilize in similar joints that have similar motions, but we call the tasks different things. I know it's early. Anybody want to be a volunteer? All I'm going to ask you to do is do some scapula stuff, and I'm going to follow your scapula with my hands to show everybody what the scapula is doing as we elevate, depress, protract, retract, upwardly, downward, rotate. Any volunteers? Left, right. Okay? Okay, let's elevate, go up, just shrug. There you go. Elevation, go down. Depression. Go up, elevation, depression. Now, that's bilateral scapula elevation. Just do the right side. This is right scapular elevation, left scapular elevation. Okay? Now, try to pinch my fingers in between these shoulders. There you go. That's retraction. Bilateral scapular retraction. Now go forward. Protraction. Back one more time. Bilateral scapular retraction. I'll just do the right. Right scapular protraction. Right scapular retraction. Okay? Now here's the fun one. Slowly bring your arms out. Okay? All right, a little faster. Okay, all the way up, 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 all the way up. Okay, now back down. See the difference? Because when you elevate and depress, there's that cancellation that's happening between the collarbone and the scapula. When you upwardly rotate, you get this happening. Okay? One more time. Arms up. You can go fast. Perfect. Down. Upward, down rotation. Perfect. All right. And did that help? You got to see, you got to feel. It's like, oh, I'm glad I volunteered. I'm going to have that for the rest of my life. Why is scapular motion so important? First of all, it's important to know what's actually contributing to certain things. But for those of you that are going to be going off into school, and listen, whether you're a physical educator, coach, knowing what's happening in different joints is kind of important. You therapists, you athletic trainers, if somebody has limits to their motion, we need to know where those limits are taking place. We need to know where those limiting factors are taking place. Just because someone can abduct, or what we think is abduction, may not be abduction. What I mean by that is if there's a condition that I learned, I've never seen one in person. Oh no, I take that back, I've seen one. They call it, it was one of my softball players. They call it frozen shoulder. A lot of times it's after surgery when you don't rehab the way you're supposed to. A lot of times people will do their rehab back home and they don't go to rehab and they're not doing it. And your joint will scar up. Scar tissue is just like cement that your body puts down. That if you don't rehab it right, it's just gonna freeze up. My wife dislocated her pinky one time and she didn't do her rehab right, and it's like stuck. Scarred up. She didn't do her rehab right. Okay? Don't blame me, I wasn't there. We weren't married at the time. Here's the point. If someone's shoulder joint couldn't move if you tried, let's just pretend magic, they could still have the illusion of abduction for about 60 degrees. Why? Because the scapula can lean about 60 degrees and make it look like the shoulder's going out. You see what I'm getting to? So that's why it's important to really see what's happening. What's happening, okay? The contribution of the scapula is big, is real, real big. We take it for granted because they work a lot together, but the contribution is big. One more time. I got another cool trick for you. One time I was at a conference, and they, you know, at conferences they have people trying to sell you stuff, right? Well, this guy was trying to sell, now it's laughable. In fact, I think they lost a lawsuit, but it was kind of like common sense. They were selling these holograms, and these holograms, like, you know, the wrist bracelets, and it's supposed to restore your energy. I mean, it was just... But this was the pitch. Let's check your motion at your shoulder and see if you're normally functioning. Now, when we move our arm, we don't think about the scapula. We just kind of bring our arm in the air, and that's shoulder. But watch what happens when I don't allow you to move your scapula. Put your arm up in the air. That's crazy, huh? I'm not pushing on this glenohumeral joint. I'm just depressing his scapula. One more time. And so what this dude was doing, he was like, let's check your motion. And he wasn't like hanging on me, right? I'll just do it for effect. But he was making sure that I wouldn't contribute with my scapula. And he was saying, oh, let's check out that shoulder. Look how limited you are, right? And then he'd give me the little hologram, and he'd go, now let's check. Whoa! Look at what that hologram would do. And I was like, I'm about to just shake your world out, sir. I didn't. I was just like, well, that's amazing. How does that work? What's the mechanism of it work? How does that, like, I started kind of doing, like, scientific questions, and I was like, is it witchcraft? Is it, is it sorcery? And after about 20 minutes, it was just like, can you please leave? Like, no, man, we're having fun. Feeling that difference, though, man, that's a big deal, because when you deny yourself the contribution of the scapula, you deny yourself a ton of function. So again, the illusion is that because they work together so much, we just give most of the credit to the glenohumeral joint, when that scapula, this literal motion of the socket itself, repositioning of the socket itself, is extremely significant to human movement, okay? I think last class, remember I gave you like a challenge of if you worked out, like to do your scapular retraction first, and then, like, it's just, sometimes we don't even realize that motion is there until we separate it and do it separately, because it just happens so naturally together. But the scapular contribution is separate and independent from the shoulder and elbow contribution. Okay? All right. So what, as my good friend, has anybody ever had Dr. Sato for a class yet? Yeah. So he and I go way back to Southern Mississippi. He was one of my student athletic trainers when I was a graduate student there. And anytime we would learn something new, he'd be like, okay, Brian, let's review. And so we're going to review in honor of Dr. Sato. What can the shoulder do? Shoulder can ab, and add, it can flex and it can extend, it can internally and externally rotate. In anatomical position, you don't have the road option to have horizontal AP and adduction, right? You gotta, if you want to travel on Interstate 20, east and west, just like you travel on I-10, you gotta go up to get to that interstate to be able to travel down that road, okay? Here is what the shoulder does not do. The shoulder does not shrug, the shoulder does not elevate, the shoulder doesn't do any of that stuff. That is all scapular contribution. Okay? So when I do something like this, your temptation is to say that was shoulder motion. Don't assume, okay? Don't assume. Be like, Campbell's trying to trick me. But I'm really not trying to trick you. I'm just trying to test your understanding for stuff that I'm trying to teach you. I can understand if you don't understand, then it's tricky. But if you understand, it's not tricky. You should be expecting those kind of questions. Okay? So, what is this? Bilateral short scapular elevation. What is this? Bilateral scapular depression. Bilateral scapular protraction, retraction. And then you can't do it, because if your arms stay down, you're going to cancel out. The only way to get that upper rotation is for your arms to go up so that you can have this happen. If your arms don't go up, you can have this. Okay? Let's look at how protraction and retraction can help our functional circle. And remember, functional circle is just being able to get your hands in infinite limiting points in your bubble of work potential. Remember, glenohumeral joint motion is very limited. It's super cool, super useful. But in terms of reaching forward, look at all that extra stuff that my scapula gave me. Reaching across, watch, I'm going to keep my scapula fixed. Look at all that extra stuff that scapula gives me. Reaching back. It's all repositioning of the socket itself. In other words, doesn't that kind of make sense? If I run out of articulating surface and I need to get further back, why not reposition the whole darn thing? You get further back. Okay? In terms of illusions, and I think this is actually a repeat, but I don't mind repeating this stuff because this is challenging. We're going to get into some of our illusions. If I can make this work. Any questions while I try to make this work? Are we clear about, does the scapula and the shoulder work a lot together? Heck yeah. And do we have functional tasks that we may call a jab? Yeah. But we don't have joint motions called a jab. We have to say, the elbow did this, the shoulder did that, the scapula contributed like this. That's the key. A functional task is a vertical jump. The motions that contributed to that task are what happened at the ankles, what happened at the knees, what happened at the hips, what happens in the pelvis. That's the difference. For another analogy, a chef is going to look at a cake differently than we look at a cake. I look at a cake and nom, dude, cake. I just see cake. A chef might see ingredients that went in, steps and processes that went in to make that. That's how we are in kinesiology. You know, lay people just see tasks. We have to see what makes those tasks possible. Just remember, guys, to get to Friday, bro, we got to pass through Monday. It's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. Somebody's got a case of the Mondays. All right, while this comes up, let me give you some functional tasks, and you tell me how the scapula can contribute. Let's pretend somebody was doing push-ups, and their motion was happening in the shoulder sagittal plane. You know what that's telling me? That their elbows are in, right? Their elbows aren't out, their elbows are in, mostly sagittal plane. How could the scapula contribute to them getting their body as high up off the ground as possible while still keeping their hands on the ground? How could the scapula significantly contribute? By protracting, yeah. And how could the scapula contribute to get their chest to the ground? Retracting. If your scapula didn't do that, you couldn't get your chest to the ground. The retraction is what really helps to lower the chest down. And another curveball that I gave you was with pull-ups versus pull-downs versus dips. That's a tricky one. So let's do the dips, because I sure know I'm not going to do them. All right, guys, no more corny jokes, I promise, for today. Let's try to find a good one. All right. I put my mind upon this dip. All right, I lied. All right, that's the last one. And go. Come on. You can do it. Okay, from here, he pushes himself up. That was the actual worst thing that can happen. It's all right, that makes it worse. It has to, Pavlov, man. It has to be something they did with the lights, because in the past they used to be able to just turn off the front, we could see. All right. He goes up. He goes up. We're going to have some elbow contribution. We're going to have some shoulder contribution. What I'm specifically asking you now is, let's say, well, scapula obviously is what I want to ask you, but we can even discuss shoulder, but I have to be very specific to plane contribution, because there's going to be combinational stuff happening. So I could say, what was his shoulder contribution in the sagittal? Well, then that would be a shoulder flexion motion. Right? I could say, what was the contribution in his trunks transverse? So that's kind of a horizontal adduction contribution. But right now, I just want to talk about scapula. What would be the scapula's contribution of him pushing himself up? Now, the trick with that is that his body goes up, And your instinct wants to say, well, if something's going up, that must be elevation. You see how that naturally kind of tempts itself to work together? Because I taught you elevation is the scapula going up. But we also learned lefty-loosey, but I can open that son of a gun by moving the bottle the other way, right? It's the cap and bottle that's so ever popular in biomechanics. So even though his body goes up, it's because his scapula went down relative to his trunk. So he actually had scapular depression while he's bringing his body up. We can look at it a lot of different ways. The best one, or the one I like to look at, is the before and after. If he starts like this, and he came off of the bench, and he kept everything else in anatomical except for his scapula, he would be shrugged. And then if he got back on, and he came up, and he let go, and he brought everything else down. I mean, he went from here to there, and the only way that's possible is with scapular depression. So I think that's an illusionary scapular question, because our temptation of ups and downs aren't always what they seem. Any follow-up questions with this? Okay, let's go to All right, let's talk about how the scapula can contribute to this one. Thank you. All right, on the test, I might say left to right. On the test, I might flip it to do right to left. But the key thing is that on the left side, the scapula is here. And on the right side, the scapula is there. Everybody see that? So from left to right, I had downward rotation. From right to left, I had upward rotation. And again, it's a contribution. It's contributing to her functional circle, being able to get her hands up overhead. Life is a lot easier when you have someone that's defined where you can see things, right? You're going to be working with people who you may not be able to see what's happening, so you're going to have to visually see what's happening with clues, with movement clues, clothing clues. Let's do a couple more. Oh my gosh, that's so cute. There you are. Okay. Left to right. What's happening at the hips? What you think? Left to right. Bilateral. So even if you had bilateral, hip, away from 6. Hips right to left, bilateral hip, and so the same concept would be happening at the shoulders. From here to there, bilateral shoulder, and remember, we don't do the, I say we don't, I encourage you not to do the whole towards or away from the midline, Because even though this works, if you keep going, it doesn't. Because eventually you start coming back. And a lot of people will get that trick where they're like, well, this is ab, and then if you come back, then this is ad. Okay? Now, how can the scapula help? It's actually, even though we call them separate movements, it's very you have to really concentrate to not have your scapula contribute both elevationally and rotationally, okay? Like you have to really make an effort to depress your scapula. In other words, your body is like, well, if I need to rotationally get my hand at 12 o'clock, that means I must be reaching for something. So those two happen hand in hand. How will I differentiate on the test? Okay. On the test, I will only ask you upward, downward rotation questions coinciding with hand positions, bringing your hands up, bringing your hands down. In other words, rotationally, how can it help? How can you reposition to angulate the hand up, not necessarily linearly? So in other words, there's going to be key words. How can your scapula help you reach a little higher? You see how that's a key word for elevation. Get up a little higher. Okay? So, here to there, scapula can help by upwardly rotating from left to right, right to left. Scapula is going to help by downwardly rotating. And the question is going to follow hands. Hands going up, hands going down. Now, do your hands, no, technically that would still work as well. Let's take something that has some cancellation to it. Let's talk about like an upright row, where my hands are still going up, but I'm still going to have upward rotation. In fact, for those of you that do this exercise, you feel that son of a gun in your back, right? Your upper back. Like after you do some upright rows, yeah, your shoulders are getting a little work. But when you're done, dude, your traps feel like they're getting to work. That's because of the muscles that are working to help by upwardly rotating that scapula to help get the arms up. Okay? That's why. That's why you feel it back there, because those scapular muscles are really, really working to reposition that scapula. All right, so I think we should be good to move on from the scapula. Oh, nope, I ain't going over there. Learn my lesson. Only took me 5 mistakes. All right, so let's summarize. After today, you should have a good introduction to shoulder and scapular motion. How do you develop that information? Study, practice. When you're in the weight room and you're doing motions, what is this called? What is that called? If you're not in the weight room and you're at home, grab a can of peas, just move, do stuff, and practice the verbiage. Get in small groups to confirm that you're practicing correct verbiage. Again, the best way to learn a foreign language is to speak it. Find someone and speak it. Okay? If you're having problems, that's why I'm here super early in the morning. Come early and we can talk about it. If you want to read ahead, next we are venturing here, elbow and radial ulnar joint. Then we're going to do the wrist, and we're going to do cervical, trunk, and then we'll take our next test. Okay? All right, guys, y'all have a good day.